Tommy's hands shook as he handed his crumpled napkin sketch to the CEO. Minutes earlier, he was just a maintenance man ignored by everyone. Now, the future of a $4 billion trucking giant depended on a plan he scribbled between fixing pipes and braiding his daughter's hair. Could one man's quiet brilliance rescue thousands of jobs? Tommy Harris rose each morning long before sunrise, the alarm clock's shrill beep slicing through the heavy silence of their small apartment above the old truck stop. He tiptoed past Rosie's room, careful not to wake her too early. When he finally heard her sleepy giggle, he'd sit her at the kitchen table, braiding her light brown hair into the twin pigtails she loved, all while reciting silly poems that made her laugh even through the morning grogginess. These moments were Tommy's anchor, the only time he felt he was getting at least one part of fatherhood right. He carried Rosie's backpack as they walked down cracked sidewalks to the school bus, waving until the yellow vehicle disappeared into the morning mist. Only then did Tommy turn to face his other world, the sprawling Titan logistics yard, a maze of corroded pipes, rattling trailers, and engines coughing black smoke. Officially, his title was maintenance assistant, but most days he was the ghost everyone ignored. The corporate office, a sleek tower of mirrored glass overlooking the depot, loomed like an alien fortress. Executives passed Tommy without a glance, their polished shoes clicking across concrete as if he was part of the scenery. He fixed leaky hoses in the fueling station, unclogged toilets in the trucker's lounge, and climbed under trailers to replace busted brake lines. His hands were always smeared with grease, his uniform stiff with grime no washing machine could erase. Yet behind the dirt-streaked coveralls lived a man who once dreamed of finishing his logistics degree, a goal he abandoned when cancer stole his wife and left him a single father to a grieving little girl. At night, Tommy tucked Rosie into bed with lullabies his wife used to sing, then settled into his own chair with stacks of outdated routing charts he rescued from trash bins. He scribbled notes in the margins, comparing load patterns, wondering why shipments zigzagged across 3 states instead of following a straight line. Tommy began noticing odd patterns. Certain routes repeated mistakes, empty trucks rolled hundreds of miles for pickups that never materialized, and some hubs handled incompatible goods that clogged docks for days. The more he studied, the more he felt Titan's system was hemorrhaging money from mistakes so obvious anyone who'd spent time on the road could see them. But Tommy was convinced no one at the top cared to ask. He tried once to voice his concerns to a mid-level supervisor. The man had barely looked up from his coffee before waving Tommy away with a curt, "That's not your department." Every day, Tommy's sense of helplessness deepened. He heard whispers around the yard, talk of Titan bleeding $50 million every quarter, drivers being furloughed, and rumors of a buyout that would leave thousands unemployed. He pictured Rosie's face when he'd have to tell her they'd lost their home. Panic twisted his gut at the thought of uprooting her again. He knew what it was like to have life upended overnight. He couldn't bear watching Rosie endure that same chaos. As tensions rose, the yard became a place of barely masked fear. Truckers snapped at dispatchers over delayed assignments, managers barked orders without solutions, and the corporate offices became sealed bunkers where rumors died and panic spread. Tommy worked in this storm of anxiety, invisible but listening. He memorized every snippet of conversation he overheard from drivers venting in the lounge and managers huddled outside conference rooms. Sometimes, as Tommy tucked Rosie in, she'd look up at him with worried eyes and ask softly, "Daddy, will you always have a place to work?" Her words stung more than he let show, and he'd pull the blanket up to her chin, forcing a reassuring smile he didn't feel. After she drifted to sleep clutching her stuffed bunny, Tommy would sit in the dark beside her bed, wondering how he could promise safety in a world where his job, and their home, felt like it was slipping away. Deep down, he knew Titan's collapse was imminent if nothing changed. But how could a man everyone saw as the lowliest worker make anyone believe he'd found the answer? On his worst nights, he stared at the photo of his wife on the nightstand and whispered apologies for failing to keep their promise of giving Rosie a happy, stable life. Then he'd pick up his pen, spread out the coffee-stained charts, and keep searching for patterns until his eyes burned with exhaustion. In those quiet hours, determination hardened in his chest. He couldn't let Rosie lose everything. He needed a plan, even if no one was willing to listen to him. The storm arrived like a hammer, pelting the Titan logistics yard with sheets of cold rain that turned the cracked asphalt into a mirror of angry gray clouds. Tommy walked through puddles in his worn boots, fixing a diesel pump that threatened to flood the fueling bay. Thunder rolled overhead as Rosie waited inside the truck stop diner with Miss Cheryl, the kind waitress who always slipped her extra marshmallows for her cocoa. When his shift ended, Tommy joined them, his bones aching from crawling under trailers all day. The restaurant smelled like freshly baked cookies, familiar comforts in a life where little else felt secure. He slumped into the booth across from Rosie, who was busy coloring butterflies on the back of a paper placemat. Around them, truckers debated road closures, and two dispatchers in Titan jackets whispered nervously about missed deliveries and canceled contracts. As Tommy listened, pieces of the puzzle he'd been studying clicked together in his mind. His eyes drifted to the ketchup-stained napkin next to his coffee mug. He grabbed a pen and began sketching furiously, oblivious to the commotion around him. He drew a circle for a new central hub, connecting it to smaller regional nodes, then reclassified lines not by where trucks started or ended, but by what they carried: perishables, construction supplies, retail goods. He mapped faster, building a network prioritizing compatibility of cargo types to reduce bottlenecks. Rain battered the diner's windows as the napkin filled with lines, arrows, and scribbled notes. For a brief moment, Tommy forgot he was a maintenance man and felt like the logistics expert he'd once dreamed of becoming. But when the last line was drawn, he froze. His heart pounded. What could he do with this? Who would ever take him seriously? The corporate managers barely acknowledged his existence. He stuffed the napkin into his pocket, ashamed at the foolish hope flickering inside him. As the storm intensified, he bundled Rosie into her raincoat, ready to hurry home. But halfway across the flooded lot, Rosie started coughing. A sharp, wheezing gasp that made Tommy's blood run cold. She dropped to her knees, struggling for air. Her inhaler was in his locker, 2 buildings away. Panic and terror slammed into Tommy as he scooped her up, sprinting through pelting rain toward the dispatch center, praying someone inside could help. He burst through the double doors, soaked and frantic. The dispatchers looked up in shock as he shouted for help. Rosie's face had turned pale, her small hands clawing at his shirt. Voices called out. Someone handed him an emergency inhaler from the first aid kit. Tommy pressed it to Rosie's lips, whispering desperate reassurances until her breathing eased into ragged but steady gasps. In the chaos, Olivia Grant, Titan's CEO, appeared at the entrance of the dispatch center, drawn by the commotion. She was supposed to be rushing to an emergency video call with shareholders demanding explanations for Titan's spiraling losses. Instead, she stopped cold, eyes widening at the sight of Rosie clinging to Tommy's neck. She knelt beside them, brushing Rosie's hair from her damp forehead, asking what happened. As Tommy choked out his gratitude, Rosie, still catching her breath, looked up at Olivia with wide eyes and said, "My daddy can fix the trucks so they don't get lost anymore." Olivia's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. Rosie, determined to prove her father's worth, reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled napkin. Olivia took it gingerly, her eyes scanning the chaotic sketch. Tommy tried to stammer an apology, sure he was about to be reprimanded for wasting her time. But Olivia kept reading, her expression shifting from confusion to intrigue, then to a flicker of hope he hadn't seen in anyone's eyes for months. She looked at Tommy, water dripping from his hair onto the polished dispatch floor. "Did you make this?" she asked. He nodded, his voice caught in his throat. Olivia glanced at Rosie, who beamed proudly despite her red-rimmed eyes. Olivia stood, straightened her soaked jacket, and said, "Come with me." As they walked together through the cavernous dispatch hall, Tommy couldn't help but steal glances at Olivia. Here was the most powerful person in the company taking his napkin sketch seriously. Yet his hands trembled with doubt. Would she really consider his idea? Or was this a courtesy extended only because of Rosie's distress? Meanwhile, managers and supervisors watched with curiosity, their eyes darting from Tommy's filthy uniform to Olivia's determined stride. Whispers spread faster than the storm outside. Something big was happening, and the man no one noticed was suddenly at the center of it. Tommy's boots squelched with each step across the pristine marble floor of Titan's executive tower. The storm outside continued its furious assault, rattling the windows of the top-floor boardroom where Olivia Grant had led him and Rosie. Tommy felt painfully out of place under the cold stares of polished executives adjusting silk ties and designer watches. Rosie clutched his hand, her small fingers the only warmth anchoring him as they stepped into the circle of leather chairs and sleek laptops. The air buzzed with impatience. Board members had been hastily assembled after word spread that Olivia was bringing a maintenance worker to propose a plan that could decide Titan's fate. Faces he recognized from corporate posters, the CFO with silver hair, the COO who barked orders over the intercom, now looked him up and down with expressions of open skepticism. A manager he'd once asked for extra wrenches smirked from the corner, as if waiting for Tommy to embarrass himself. Olivia took her seat at the head of the table, the soaked napkin sketch laid out in front of her like a sacred document. She gestured to Tommy. "Explain it to them," she said firmly, her eyes daring anyone to interrupt. Tommy's throat went dry. The walls seemed to close in as he felt every eye drilling into him. Rosie squeezed his hand. He took a shaky breath and began. He started by describing the chaos he'd witnessed daily. Trucks overlapping routes, empty trailers chasing pickups already canceled, drivers losing hours sitting idle at the wrong hubs. He explained how organizing by geography had made sense decades ago, but modern supply chains demanded efficiency based on load type. "It's like trying to store fresh milk and steel girders on the same delivery schedule," he said, voice growing steadier. "They spoil each other." He pointed to the napkin, outlining a plan to reposition hubs near clusters of key suppliers, cold storage near dairy plants, steel distribution near construction hotspots, while assigning trucks specialized by cargo instead of location. This would slash deadhead miles, reduce fuel costs, and keep delivery promises that clients were ready to sue over. His hands traced new routes across imaginary maps, the same movements he'd repeated at night by Rosie's bedside. For a moment, silence settled over the room. Then the COO scoffed. "We've paid consultants millions for routing solutions. Now you're telling us a janitor has cracked the code with a napkin?" A few chuckles rippled around the table, but Olivia cut him off sharply. "I've seen the numbers. His ideas match real pain points our own reports highlight, but no one proposed a plan this integrated." She gestured to the dispatch team monitoring live data on a wall screen behind them. "Let's test it now." And yes, Titan's outdated software didn't know the best way to organize the routes. The millions they spent every year didn't have the solutions the simple man had imagined. One by one, dispatchers entered Tommy's proposed routes into the system. Red and yellow lines on the map began shifting. Icons representing trucks changed direction. Seconds turned into minutes as real-time updates flowed in. Pickups completed faster, empty miles reduced, fuel estimates dropping. The dispatch supervisor, pale and wide-eyed, turned to the board. "We're seeing nearly 40% fewer empty miles already. If this holds, we could save tens of millions this quarter." The buzz filled the room. Some board members demanded projections. Others questioned risk. The CFO asked for simulations. Olivia slammed her hand on the table. "Everyone quiet." She looked at Tommy. "Can you help us turn this test into a full rollout?" Tommy hesitated. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Rosie looked up at him with pride shining in her eyes. "But I don't have a degree. I'm just—" Olivia interrupted him with a rare smile. "You're the only person who saw the whole picture. From this moment on, you're part of the solution." A flurry of activity followed. Executives huddled with dispatchers to coordinate expanded tests. Olivia assigned Tommy a desk on the same floor as her office. She gave him access to live data, a small team of junior analysts, and her personal assurance that his position was secure. She asked him to train her staff on what he saw from the ground level that no one else had. As the boardroom emptied, Olivia lingered with Tommy and Rosie. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stepped up tonight," she admitted quietly. Tommy shook his head. "I just didn't want to lose everything. Rosie deserves better." Olivia's eyes softened. "She does. And so do you." Tommy's first official day as part of the new logistics task force began before dawn. He walked Rosie to school, kissed her forehead, then returned to Titan's executive wing, wearing his cleanest uniform but still smelling faintly of motor oil. Instead of side glances of disdain, staff greeted him with curious nods. One driver gave him a thumbs up through the glass doors. Dispatchers smiled openly. Word had spread. The maintenance man had given them a fighting chance. That day, Tommy worked alongside analysts to fine-tune the plan. He reimagined training programs for dispatchers so they could identify outdated routes on their own. He sketched custom hub layouts on whiteboards late into the night. Rosie visited after school, drawing butterflies on scrap paper and brightening the tense office. Even skeptical managers began stopping by, quietly asking for Tommy's opinion on stubborn bottlenecks. The company felt different already, as if hope had broken through the storm clouds. Titan Logistics was still in danger, but for the first time, there was a plan rooted in the reality of those who lived on the road and repaired the trucks, not just in boardroom charts. As the week wore on, preliminary financial reports showed costs dropping faster than anyone dared hope. Tommy was invited to strategy calls he never imagined he'd witness, and each time he contributed, the tone of meetings shifted. Less arrogance, more collaboration. Olivia, who once saw Titan's people as faceless cogs in a vast machine, found herself looking forward to these sessions with the man who'd taught her what she'd forgotten, that the soul of a company lived in those who kept it moving day by day. Days turned into weeks as Tommy settled into his new role. Each morning, he dropped Rosie off at school, then arrived at Titan's headquarters greeted not by cold indifference, but by nods of respect and warm smiles. Dispatchers now invited him to their morning briefings. Drivers texted him real-time updates from the road, and mechanics sought his insight on why certain routes kept breaking trucks faster than others. Tommy's napkin-born plan had become a living system, evolving with every mile Titan's fleet covered. Olivia and Tommy often worked side by side late into the night, their conversations drifting from cargo forecasts to stories of family. Olivia confessed her father had been a long-haul driver who died before seeing her graduate business school. She'd spent years trying to distance herself from the life she'd come from. Tommy, in turn, shared how he felt his wife's absence most during quiet nights when Rosie asked questions only a mother could answer. Those moments bound them together, forming a trust stronger than any corporate alliance. Under Tommy's direction, Titan's logistics system transformed from a labyrinth of outdated routes into a dynamic, responsive network. Shipments that once took 8 days now arrived in 4. Customer satisfaction surged. Empty trucks became rare sightings on highways once clogged with wasted fuel and lost time. Titan's balance sheets reflected the change. Projected quarterly losses flipped into solid profits, shocking investors and delighting drivers who had feared layoffs. Inspired by Rosie's visible struggles with asthma during that rainy night, Olivia proposed on-site childcare centers at major Titan hubs, staffed with nurses and teachers. Tommy helped design cozy rooms where drivers' kids could learn, nap, and play while parents hauled loads across the country. Rosie was the first child enrolled, quickly becoming everyone's little ambassador, bringing drawings and stories of her dad's magic map that saved Titan. A pilot program called Hidden Talent followed, encouraging frontline workers to submit ideas for improving the company. Mechanics, warehouse staff, and drivers began sharing insights that saved time, reduced accidents, and improved morale. Titan's culture shifted almost overnight from rigid hierarchy to collaborative innovation. Dispatchers no longer saw themselves as cogs but as vital partners. Executives found themselves listening to voices they'd ignored for years. At Rosie's 10th birthday, Olivia threw a surprise party in Titan's revamped dispatch center, now filled with colorful murals painted by employees' children. Truckers in reflective jackets gathered with corporate staff, eating cake and sharing stories as equals. Rosie blew out candles shaped like tiny trucks while Tommy stood beside Olivia, overwhelmed by how far they'd come since the night the storm nearly took everything. As the music played, drivers hoisted Rosie on their shoulders, chanting her name, and she giggled with a joy Tommy hadn't heard since before her mother's passing. Olivia pulled Tommy aside, her eyes misty. "You didn't just save this company," she whispered. "You reminded us that people are worth more than profit, that we can be better." National news soon caught wind of Titan's turnaround. Articles celebrated how a single father had upended an industry from the bottom up. Tommy appeared on talk shows, humbly crediting his coworkers and Rosie for every success. Rosie sat proudly beside him, showing off the original napkin sketch laminated and framed on the set behind them. The cultural shift spread beyond Titan. Rival companies began investing in better childcare and creating programs to elevate frontline voices. Industry magazines declared Titan's model a blueprint for the future of logistics. Drivers from across the country applied to work at Titan, drawn by stories of a place where they'd be seen, heard, and valued. One evening, months after the storm, Tommy, Olivia, and Rosie stood on a hill overlooking Titan's largest hub. Sunset bathed the newly repainted trucks. Olivia handed Tommy an envelope containing Titan's offer of permanent employment as Vice President of Logistics Innovation. His hands trembled as he read the letter. He looked at Rosie, who nodded with solemn approval, then at Olivia, who smiled with a warmth deeper than gratitude. "I'll accept," he whispered, his voice thick, "but only if you promise me one thing, that we'll never forget where we came from." She took his hand and Rosie's, sealing a silent pact. Together, they watched headlights of returning trucks blink like fireflies across the darkening yard, each rig a testament to second chances, quiet courage, and the power of one unseen man to rebuild not just a company, but a community. Sometimes heroes wear grease-stained coveralls, and sometimes the greatest ideas are scribbled on diner napkins. Would you have had the courage to share your idea like Tommy did? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that prove one person can make all the difference. See you in the next video.